afternoon. I'm honored to lead you through this ARKO Online International Symposium. My name is Seonghee. This International Symposium for 2021 is now being held by Arts Council Korea and also 5 other partner countries, including the UK, Germany, Denmark, Singapore, and the Netherlands, which participated in the International Exchange Joint Fund project, which is ARKO's major international exchange project. On day 1, we had thought-provoking discussions on what changes the pandemic brought about to our society and how art had responded to the crisis. Today, during this second day session, we are going to focus on relationship, connection, and exchange in this era of pandemic. Another round of illuminating session is in store for us to discuss how and what the pandemic has affected and changed international exchange activities and how we can promote and seek for reconnections. But before that, we would like to hear a few words of congratulatory remarks. First of all, we would like to hear from Darren Heldney, Chief Executive of Arts Council England, who will give us a congratulatory remarks.
I'm delighted to be able to participate in the opening of this international symposium hosted by our friends at Arts Council Korea. While we've been physically isolated by COVID for a full year now, the world has become paradoxically smaller as we've all learned to work together across organisations and across borders online. International collaboration has reached digital maturity as a result of the global pandemic. And while we all want to get back to live experiences as soon as we can, the new ease with which we can experience creativity online and exchange views virtually is to be welcomed. This symposium brings together partners, artists and thinkers from Asia and Europe, Singapore, Denmark, Germany, the Netherlands and Korea. And I want to say just how pleased we are at Arts Council England to be engaging with you all to explore common themes and share new practice. In 2016, the Arts Councils of Korea and England co-invested in a series of projects which saw artists from our 2 countries collaborating, co-creating and exchanging performances. One visual arts project organised exchanges and residencies for artists across 12 Korean and 11 UK partners, from craft makers to mural artists to video game designers, moving between larger cities like Busan and Sheffield, as well as more rural communities. Another saw Crying Out Loud, the UK-based producers of visual theatre, commission a new piece of hip-hop dance for Sea Dance Festival in Seoul, and the National Theatre of Korea brought its triumphant production of Trojan Women to London's South Bank Centre. We're proud of the work we were able to do together, and a legacy of partnerships continues between artists and producers in our 2 countries. The themes of this symposium, equality, innovation, digital, climate change, and the contribution that culture can make to health, are all close to our hearts at Arts Council England. The Arts Council has spent much of the last year distributing crisis funding to arts organisations and museums unable to function during the pandemic. We took the decision to concentrate all our resources into an emergency response fund last spring, and in the summer of 2020, our government invited us to manage a cultural recovery fund, which continues to shore up the business models of many in the creative sector. We know that the recovery phase is set to continue a little longer, but we're also giving attention to what we can do to facilitate reset and revival for artists, curators, audiences, and community projects, both at home and in collaboration with international partners. We published our new 10-year strategy last year as the pandemic hit. In the light of everything that has happened since then, not just COVID, but Black Lives Matter and the UK's departure from the European Union, we've refocused our priorities and our commitments in a 1-year delivery plan for 2021 to 2022, which will be published later this spring. That plan has 5 themes. Along with supporting the sector to recovery from COVID, we will prioritise support for individual artists, give particular attention to diversity, make local investments in culture to change the quality of life in communities, and take measures to re-establish the international exchange and collaboration which are crucial to the artistic ambition and economic viability of so many arts organisations, museums and cultural practitioners. I'm glad to see that my colleague John McMahon is speaking later in the symposium on the theme of arts and health. This has been an important area of work for us over the last year or two, and it's yet another area in which the arts can play an inspiring and remedial role in wider society. Thank you for listening, and please have a fantastic time. We look forward to seeing you here in the UK in the not too distant future.
Following congratulatory speech by Darren Henley, Chief Executive of ACE, Einar Jensen, the Danish ambassador to the Republic of Korea, will give us his welcoming speech.
Hello, my name is Einar Jensen. I'm the Danish ambassador to Korea, and I would like to welcome you all to 2021 Arts Council Korea International Online Symposium. There have been a great number of cultural activities during 2018 and 2019 on the occasion of the 60th anniversary of diplomatic relations between Denmark and Korea. Danish Agency for Culture and Palaces and Arts Council Korea signed an MOU, and especially through International Arts Joint Funds, we were able to conduct a total of 25 projects together. We are very honored to be selected as one of the guests, and from Denmark, Ms. Josephine Mikau, Director of Copenhagen Architecture Festival, will speak about how arts respond to the COVID-19 pandemic and its perspective. There will be many more interesting guests speaking on the subject. I hope you will all enjoy the symposium, but most importantly, I hope that culture exchange will continue to be active even during these difficult times. Once again, congratulations to the Arts Council Korea for organizing this big event, and I wish you good luck. 감사합니다.
Thank you very much. Following that, the Paul Tan, Deputy Chief Executive of National Arts Council of Singapore, will give us the welcoming speech.
여러분, 안녕하십니까? A very good afternoon, Chairman Park Jong-kwan, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, friends of the arts. Thank you for inviting me today. I'm very happy to join you from Singapore on the second day of this International Arts Symposium. On behalf of the National Arts Council Singapore, congratulations to Arts Council Korea, ARKO, our close partner, for the successful first day of this virtual symposium. In times like these, when we cannot gather physically in a room together, we're grateful for digital platforms like this that allow the international arts community to come together and continue the important work of cultural exchange. While many things have been upended by the pandemic, it is true that we must continually learn to tap on digital tools to ensure that the arts and culture sector, which we hold so close to our hearts, remains sustainable, and that we can adapt to the new circumstances in creative ways. Indeed, the pandemic has deeply affected economies and many sectors like the arts, culture, and entertainment. They are all feeling the impact, even as we gradually and cautiously resume arts activities. The pandemic nonetheless has shown that the artists have lived up to their reputation of resilience and creativity. Many have adapted to the new circumstances successfully, coming together to create arts that lifts all our spirits. They are truly inspiring. We've heard from our presenters yesterday on how artists in various parts of the world have responded to the pandemic with positivity and determination. As the National Arts Council in Singapore, our role is to see how we can be there to support our artists, to help them continue doing the good work of inspiring our people, connecting communities, and positioning Singapore globally through its arts. Even in a time of travel restrictions, we must continue to strengthen our international connections and partnerships so that our artists remain plugged into the global arts conversations. Technology has proven to be that effective bridge. So until the time we can finally meet face to face, I believe there is much that we can learn from each other's experiences, especially in the lessons that we have gleaned from last year. I look forward to today's program and wish everyone a very fruitful afternoon. Thank you. 감사합니다.
That was a speech by Deputy Chief Executive Paul Tan of National Arts Council of Singapore. Next, Director ㍍Discussion of Dutch Culture Center for International Cultural Cooperation has sent us the welcoming message. Let me read it out for you. Good afternoon. I am ㍍Discussion, Director of Dutch Culture Center for International Cooperation in Amsterdam, the Netherlands. I'm really sorry that I cannot be with you all today live, but we are very grateful in the Netherlands about the kind invitation from our partner, Arts Council Korea, to take part in this meaningful and timing international symposium. We are glad that the Byvanck, Managing Director of DEN, the Dutch Knowledge Institute on Culture and Digitalization, shared with you yesterday about the Dutch experience of field lab events, looking for a solution for culture and creative sectors out of the pandemic. Today, Valentijn Byvanck, Director of Mares House for Contemporary Culture in Maastricht, the Netherlands, will give us excellent presentation, speaking from an art institutional perspective. I wish you all another inspiring day with fruitful exchange and discussion, and we look forward to further close cooperation between South Korea and the Netherlands in the near future with ARKO. Thank you. So as you can see, through the various speeches, though we are meeting in virtual setting, the video messages from various countries is truly delivering ardent desire to continuously pursue cooperation and connection. Truly, the format of this event, whether it's online or offline, cannot overshadow our commitment and passion. In this sense, in fact, as I said earlier, today's symposium has been organized as a part of the International Arts Joint Fund project. The project began back in 2016 as ARKO established joint fund together with British Council and Art Council England. Since then, the project has been the main flagship project of ARKO's International Exchange Department and contribute a lot to explore opportunities for joint collaborative project between countries. Let us briefly watch the video to introduce the project. Now, we would like to invite today's presenters. So it will be about the relationship, connection, and also exchanges in the pandemic era. So Keng, Artistic Director of TheatreWorks, will give us the keynote presentation. While everybody is focusing on connection and the need for connection via digitalization and and platform technology, Artistic Director Keng will shine us on things that are hidden behind various attempts for cross-border connection. So now we'd like to hear from Mr. Keng.
Hello everyone, good day. This is Dr. Keng Sen-ong, and I'm very pleased to be invited for the keynote today. I would like to thank the organizers, especially the Korean National Arts Council, for organizing this entire event today. And perhaps I think it's interesting to look at the change in our world since the pandemic. And of course, this would move on beyond the pandemic. And there are certain central issues which affect the arts today, especially this deep sense of how do we engage with the international today because of a lot of travel restrictions, because of a lot of inequities in the world, the richer nations having vaccines and the poorer nations not having vaccines. And hence, I think that this situation would continue. And we all know the situation. We basically cannot connect across borders apart from a digitalized platform like this that we are talking through today. And we know that this situation will probably get better once the vaccines come out, but at the same time, once they're all rolled out, but at the same time, it's still quite a conjecture whether or not the world can go back to life as before. And even if we do have a situation of safety, of safety in regards to health issues after the vaccines are rolled out, it's still yet to be seen, right? It's still yet to be seen. And we have basically, I suspect that the whole of 2021 would be an issue, meaning that travel will still be very restrictive. And after that, perhaps we could see a change in the spring of 2022. And I think that it's not a coincidence that many artists that I'm meeting and talking to internationally, because, for example, I've done 3 quarantines in 5 months, because I'm still trying to physically connect across borders and to still physically be in spaces where collaboration is desired and collaboration is actually actively still being nurtured. And in that sense, the question of why the need for collaboration is central, right? Because I feel that most of us, most of the different cultures that I've been to are looking for new eyes to look at the issues at home, which is the new eyes which comes from an international visitor, a foreigner to the local context, and to have this situation where the local context is actually looked at with new eyes. And you see, I think that all this was actually very well placed in the world before we crashed into the iceberg of the pandemic, right? Because we still don't know how deep the fallout will be of this iceberg of the pandemic. And I think that we have to acknowledge that what's going to happen is that perhaps we are going to completely lose the international in a deep way, apart from something digitalized like that, which as we know is completely two-dimensional. But at the same time, perhaps the world is poised on a new stage where we are going to be living life with quite a lot of artificial intelligence, that perhaps we are struggling as the first generation of human beings who are forced to literally pulled out of our safety zone to enter new ways of communication. And perhaps the future will be the human plus post-human beings who are helping us to communicate, right? So we're struggling right now with that transition. Perhaps this is an optimistic perspective of the world, where from human we move into a post-human situation where it's a combination of machines and human beings, in a way deciphering the world and moving forward. But these are large issues, and I think that one of the things I want to start off first with is that it's no coincidence for me that in my travels around and in my talks on the digitalized platforms right now, there were two artists who very strongly voiced the difficulties of the new normal. And this new normal is actually, again, of course, going back to a world where the old power structures and the old relationships between the global north and the global south is going to continue, where the power and the finance and the economy and the resources are completely controlled by the north, and the south is localized, unable to travel, and in a sense maybe exploited by the north, as a kind of context that was in a way before the pre-contemporary, right? That we know that in the last 30 years, 40 years, the advance made towards crossing borders, the advance made by the women's movement, the advance made by civil movements of all sorts, was very phenomenal. I think this was really the power of the last 4 decades. And as we cross into late capitalism, we see that what has happened is that our world has actually managed to survive and actually managed to connect across borders. And two filmmakers, writers who are women, actually said to me a very interesting line. They said that, how can we make our work today as young women solo filmmaker or as young women writer? We have been crossing borders very fluidly in the last decade. But now when you're under this pandemic, you can't actually gather, right? The largest issue is that human beings are now no longer allowed to gather physically, right? Because of fears of infection. And in that sense, it means that the solo artist, the human being who's working alone to try to connect, to try to make research, to try to make documentaries, to try to connect across borders is almost impossible. Now everything is institutionalized and the large institutions control the conversation. So I think that it's no coincidence that both of these women, who I think the women are very, very sensitive to this issue because their freedoms have been long and hard fought for. And we know that the freedoms which minorities, both in gender and race and in class as well, these minorities have made some progress in terms of actually having a larger freedom, in terms of being in a more inclusive world, but all that's being wiped out right now by a kind of a new hegemony of who has the money and who has the vaccines, and also how the digitalized platforms work. We know that language is an issue. If you don't have the right language, it's very hard to communicate on a platform like this, for example, because it's very much about information. It's very much about being able to speak instantly and directly, right? Because what's happening is that as we enter into a space where we are recording more information, we know that this information is also very easily manipulated. As a kind of situation where the information is now being processed. Whatever is being recorded now can be edited, and then subsequently it can be fabricated as fake news, as we all know. So the issue of digitalization is that our world has become completely mediatized into a world which is of course no longer connected with reality. Right. So we have several colonizations and colonizations happening here. Colonizations are situations where there is a colonial power, a coloniality of power, where certain relationships are then hierarchized, right? So in that sense, it's a situation where if somebody is controlling the information, is editing the information, it means that individual is not able to get to the true source of information. So one of the things which then happens is that we are being colonized by economy in a very serious way again, and whatever progress has been made in relation to class has slowly, in relation to class and equity, has slowly been erased, or actually very quickly been cut. Right? So now we are in a situation where I feel that we are no longer able to connect across borders as we used to before, because everything is processed, everything is mediatized, and everything is being manipulated in a way through subsequent editing. So we have no longer a live presence and a direct face-to-face communication, right? And we know that this also means that because we are no longer in contact with a three-dimensional reality, we are in a very compressed, artificial 2D world, right? So you have colonization of economy, you have colonization by technology, and also I think very, very largely in the way of making art. What has been proposed recently is that the new normal includes, for instance, a way of outsourcing art making, right? And outsourcing art making means that, for example, you have a director like myself. Okay, I'm perhaps based in Singapore. I'm from Singapore. I'm sending a score or a draft to another country. Let's say I send it to Bangladesh, and I say that, okay, you know, I can't travel to Bangladesh to collaborate with you, and now I send you a score. You can please execute it locally, and please work with an associate or an assistant director, and this is then kind of executed locally. But all the time, everything that's being produced locally is being controlled by the chief artist who's away, like me, let's say in Singapore, controlling what is happening in Bangladesh, but through a long distance relationship of the Zoom platform. And I think that this is, again, another kind of colonization and therefore a collapse of collaboration. Now, we know that in the last 20 years, there's been so much talk in particular about Asia collaboration, Asia-Europe collaboration. And all this now is processed through, let's say, an Uber director, a chief director somewhere who is actually directing the locals or the natives to make work. And this is a kind of outsourcing, but the final authority still remains in a site that's economically more powerful, economically with more resources, right? So this is a kind of art making today, which I feel is actually extremely problematic. It seems very equitable. It seems very collaborative, that there is a draft which is sent to the local context, and the local context remakes it. But the person who is controlling this expression by the local context is some chief director somewhere else. And I think that this, of course, for me, is a loss of collaboration that we fought long and hard for. Right, that we had a big movement from the late 90s to the new millennium, where we were very serious as a contemporary art world, looking at how we can collaborate deeply and how we can collaborate with local contexts. And this meant that there was essential travel. Right, it's no longer essential travel. It's no longer just health and defense. Industry, but essential travel is also art and culture, right? And essential travel includes traveling to make collaborations together as a way of face-to-face, people-to-people networking, people-to-people collaboration. So I think that we have to understand how this new normal will affect us. And we know that festivals began in many parts of the world as gatherings of humans coming together to celebrate, to grieve, to discuss. In Asia, where I come from, the festival is inextricably linked to rituals, human acts to express the self, the community, our place in the larger cosmos of both the visible and the invisible. These human acts communicate in different ways, but most of all, they are about small actions of personal agency, contributing to a desired or needed transformation in the world of the living. These rituals in the festivals of the past are often about the world of the living coming to terms with death, the death of the body, the death in nature, as well as the arrival of new life, regeneration, and sustenance. Today, our festivals are often about ticket sales, subscriptions, city fireworks, opening night gala events, professional management models, and the networking opportunities for stakeholders. And so we've reached this stage during the end of the late capitalism. We're in late capitalism now. And perhaps one of the issues is that we need to go back, that the pandemic can be a cut that allows us to rethink, reimagine, reconnect the arts and perhaps the festival back to its ancient roots of human gathering, as well as the power of human beings and their personal agency to affirm life, transformation, and sustainability. All right, so this means that we have to leave behind these old structures of the festival before the pandemic, right? Because in a way, they were also moving us towards things which were, let's say, KPIs or performance indicators, which is no longer about the human connection, but it's basically about ticket sales and fireworks. And I think that the question of how can we rethink the future of a new local and a new international is, we need to therefore have a checklist of questions, right? And I'm going to go through a checklist of questions of how to possibly have a strategy to deal with the new local and the new international. So the first is that the question of what does the international bring to your festival, right? Why is the international important for your festival? Is it just window dressing, meaning that it's just a status symbol and perhaps that you can easily drop the international and just focus on the local? And if you cannot drop the international, we have to find a way to safeguard this, right? Meaning that the international is important as a way of looking anew at your local context. And how then can we protect collaboration in this model of the new international? Okay, so we all know that during this time of the pandemic, this is the second question, right? We have reduced opportunities for international live interventions, right? Many international artists, speakers, managers, philosophers are being brought in by digitalization. So when it's live, what does it mean? That means that maybe you have only, like in a festival, you have 3 live international events, which is already that you probably have to quarantine already 100 people to make these 3 live events, perhaps. Or maybe you have to quarantine maybe 30 people. Even if it's just 30 people, it's a lot of people to quarantine and to put people into like possibly a kind of a 3 weeks extra time, right? Like for example, I'm now in Taipei, I have to put in 3 weeks extra time before I can actually start my work, right? Because of quarantine and all that. So how will you prioritize the international elements necessary to your festival? Do you have a mission statement or manifesto of values to guide this setting of priorities? Now, how can we all as a team of cultural workers suggest shifts to the local curation, right? To open it up to a comparative study of other local contexts, right? That means it's not just the local, but it's a kind of trans-local, right? It's a trans-local, meaning that the different local contexts are put together in a very deep way, right? Because now we know that mostly festivals and biennales and even film festivals are really about the international brand names. These international brand names get, they start to be circulated around, and it's like every country has had perhaps the Rimini Protocol has been all over the world, right? There is a kind of like, it's an international brand name. And then the question is that perhaps with the pandemic, we can actually shift to a more local context where we look at different locals, right? And this idea of the trans-local energizing each other, right? And I think that also, the fourth point is that can the future internationalization of festivals and biennales interweave with the local context to create a kind of a braid, right? So it's a kind of a braid, a helix of the international and the local, intertwining, informing, and nurturing the other. So how can this interweaving of the local and international be installed in the DNA of the future festival or the future biennale, right? From its very beginning, and not just as a kind of a superficial strategy. So the question also, of course, is that can digitalization be a way forward? That is a kind of again, this braid of the international and the local is also a braid of the online and the live events, so that we can enrich it, that perhaps in the question of collaboration is that perhaps a lot of work or a substantial amount, 30% of the work can be first done on a digitalized platform, and then the live gathering happens later. That means the collaboration on the floor, the collaboration to discuss some kind of co-working together is initially talked on the digitalized platform and later on in life. So in that way, we reduce the processes which were maybe more wasteful in our past. So I think that inevitably, when we think about the international and the local, we have to come back to this question of decolonizing. How do we decolonize all the power structures that are presently actually leading to a much more exclusive world, a world of technology, a world of resources which favors the rich nations rather than poor nations. For example, I think that it's very clear right now that in the past, when we talk about the politics of the intercultural collaboration, we are looking at how do we balance the relationships. So how do we balance the relationships? Is it always the artists from the poorer countries who have to be quarantined? Is it always the guest artist who has to be quarantined, right? Because that means that the people at home, the people who are paying for everybody to come, are the ones who hold the power, and the rest who are being invited are the ones who have to be quarantined, right? So, and they are the ones who have to put in time, effort, and also we have to realize that during quarantine, it is a restriction of freedoms in many ways. So is it always that the same people are quarantined? Let's say we work with countries like Pakistan, with countries like Indonesia. It is always these artists from those nations that have to be quarantined, right, before they come into our cities to work with us. So I think that this idea of decolonizing needs to be a constant process, right? How do we insist on trying to make the relationships more equitable between different collaborators? And I feel like this question of trying to move past the power structures which manipulate information is therefore a very, very necessary way forward as we go into the future, as we go into future digitalization. And there are large questions which concern all our work, particularly what's at stake is that we're going to lose all the collaborations that we've fought so long and so hard for, just like the fight for civil actions, for civil rights movements, for different sexualities, for different genders, for different races, for different minorities, for different abled bodies, and maybe this will all be lost in the future as we continue to move into a world beyond the pandemic. How can we become more generous, and how can we continue to fight for a more distributive justice? Thank you very much.
So that was the keynote speech by Keng Ong, Artistic Director of TheatreWorks, who gave us very fresh perspectives on collaboration and connection. Artistic Director Keng Ong pointed out the issue of colonization sparked by art making on digital platform. Truly now is a time for us to seek for real, genuine translocal to realize fair collaboration, moving beyond the power structure and hierarchy. Now, following the keynote presentation, let us move on to the presentation session. 3 presentations are prepared for us. The first presentation will be delivered by Director of Manchester Museum, as well as the Chair of Culture, Health and Wellbeing Alliance, Esme Ward. She will talk about how art takes care of us and affect our mental health with some practical examples. I'm sure her presentation will illuminate us on how we can sustain ourselves and society even in this era of the pandemic and lockdown. Let us watch the video.
Hello, my name is Esme Ward, and I'm really honoured to be here today to share with you some reflections on this extraordinary year we've had, and particularly to really reflect on how the arts and culture might address health inequalities, especially those related to mental health. But first, I'm going to, I hope, share my screen. So I hope you can all see that. So as I mentioned, my name's Esme. I'm chair of the Culture, Health and Wellbeing Alliance, a national organisation with approximately 5,000 members. We work across the arts, so we have everyone from large organisations through to individuals across all art forms. And if you've not visited the Culture, Health and Wellbeing Alliance website, I would really encourage you to do so. You might be particularly interested in the case studies. So there are a whole host of COVID-19 case studies with some really inspiring and imaginative work at the heart of communities, really thinking about how the arts can transform our lived experiences and our health and well-being. Do take a look if you can. I'm also director of Manchester Museum at the University of Manchester, which you see here in all of its glory. Manchester Museum is one of the largest university museums in the UK. It has what's sometimes called an encyclopedic collection, so ranging from natural sciences through to human cultures, kind of archery to zoology. Its mission is fairly simple and I think profound. It's to build a more sustainable world and understanding between cultures, and really doing that by thinking about how it can develop a culture of care for each other and our world. But I'll come on to that shortly. What I'd actually like to do is first share with you something I was asked to write back in September last year. I wrote a chapter for a book which was all about inclusive leadership during COVID-19. And I just wanted to share my opening paragraph to kind of set a bit of the tone, really. It's called Motion Sickness. This is hard. As I write this, the pandemic still rages. Deeply ingrained inequalities are surfaced, and so much of the society that I hold dear is fighting for survival. Yet I'm impatient for change. I'm exhausted one moment, energized the next. I'm worried about the future, our future. We are in motion. So that sense of vulnerability, I think, shared by so many, and certainly of exhaustion, still persists. We don't yet know the full impacts of COVID-19, but the negative impact on mental health is undeniable. And yet, at the beginning of lockdown, so in April last year, end of March, we saw such generosity, mutual aid, empathy, and solidarity. I believe and hold on to the fact that it showed us what might be possible. The author, Rebecca Solnit, implored us at the time to view this as a treasure, a light and energy source that can drive a better society if it's encouraged and recognised. And I want that to be my focus, really, for today. So this image is a good place to start. This is a reflective image created by someone called Chloe Sykes, a trainee art psychotherapist. And it's a reflective image she drew exploring the role of the art therapist in creating a safe space for expression. Chloe was our art therapist in residence at Manchester Museum. Ordinarily, she would be working out in the museum with participants, volunteers. But when we all went into lockdown, she moved her work online, and she was available for any member of staff or volunteer for online art therapy sessions. And I think the issue of staff well-being and focusing for one moment on the mental health impacts for our staff is critical. How can we work with and support others' mental health when we do not address and support our own? And so this is an image from the very top floor of Manchester Museum. And I'd actually like to tell you about a young lad called James. So James goes to something called Project Inc. Project Inc. is a specialist college for neurodiverse young people. And it's a charity, it's a collaboration we have at the museum. In fact, Project Inc. have now taken over half of the top floor of the museum. They're based there. And in fact, even though the museum is currently closed to the public and we're in lockdown, we remain open each and every day for Project Inc. students, as will become clear. So I'm going to share some of James's words on what this has meant for him, and in particular, his mental health. Project Inc. is giving young people an education when so many places have had to close. It's provided autistic people, like me, structure to our week after months stuck in the first lockdown. 4 days in the museum is a helpful routine for us. It gives us something to wake up to every day and qualifications to work towards. It helps me feel calmer in general. And it's built my confidence, even to share my own views on the museum website like this. Project Inc. has enabled young people to use art and the museum as a distraction from this infectious virus, as a way of coping. For me and my friends, it's improved motivation, health, and our hopes for the future. Collaborations with partners and charities, I believe, to support our communities will be critical to addressing some of the key mental health issues and I think potentially crisis that lies ahead. I think we need to ask what we need, what our communities need us to be, or to become. And that might mean we move, in our case, beyond the traditional and usual work of the museum. Project Inc. have now got their headquarters based at the museum and intend to expand their work with other cultural organisations across the city. And like so many other organisations, work that was happening day in, day out in the museum has now moved online, like Muso Baby. In Manchester, we have a very long tradition of working in collaboration with health partners, and Muso Baby is a good example of this. Working with a music therapist and a range of health partners, it's now gone online. So this is an example of social prescribing. Online sessions are now for referred new parents, particularly those at risk of social isolation or postnatal depression. And it's just one of the programs of that kind that we run. In fact, our website, like so many, we developed for users and specifically for lockdown. We created something called Manchester Museum from Home and developed a whole area solely focused on resources for carers. This included new programs like To Have and To Heal. To Have and To Heal explores the museum's world-class Egyptology collection, the popular fascination with ancient Egyptian culture and practices, and with specialist support, in this case, bereavement counsellors, we facilitate sensitive, in-depth conversations around responses to loss, bereavement, and resilience, and explore personal reflections and experiences of the pandemic. Our focus is on working with care homes, with mental health charities like Mind, and bereavement groups and organisations. And I believe this is a critical role in partnership with others to create a space or make a space where people can express their experiences of the past year. We also share other resources. So our cultural first aid kit, developed in partnership with the museum and the Whitworth Art Gallery, includes activities to do with those you care for. It was piloted with stroke survivors and care home staff, and all of these activities are available to download, and many of them relate to mental health. In all of them, really, they encourage connectedness to each other, our world, and the past. And they're great. And working online, we have learnt so much, but digital exclusion is a real issue. Many thousands of young people, families, and residents have no or limited access to the digital world. So last year, as soon as lockdown happened, a whole host of us started talking across our city region in public health, arts organisations. We started thinking about the digitally excluded and what we might do. We asked how together we might address this. And 35 organisations, that's over 300 volunteers, combined forces to create a series of creative care kits. 16,000 packs, the one you see on the left, were distributed to older people, and over 22,000 packs distributed to 13 to 20-year-olds. The packs were put into boxes alongside art materials and, in fact, seed bombs, and distributed via the postal system to, in collaboration with health and social care partners. Our combined authority masterminded the process, and I'm very proud Manchester Museum was at the heart of it. The power of collective endeavour and mutual aid showed us what can be achieved together. And this place-based working, I think, will only grow in the future. Partners and those who received the pack told us that they may be shielded, but they knew they hadn't been forgotten. They told us that the activities had reduced anxiety and stimulated our minds. And this coming together across sectors with the health, arts and social care we believe is our future. Indeed, the future, I think, is collaborative. Hello Future is actually the name of Manchester Museum's transformation programme as it goes through a large capital transformation. But really acknowledging this past year and equipping us to respond imaginatively, inclusively, and with care is at the heart of our transformation. I think now really is the time for all of us maybe to break with some of our bad habits and traditions, maybe being competitive with other organisations, and perhaps shift the language and thinking of the past towards a context of possibility for the future. Maybe we can drop grim, dehumanising terms like target audiences or hard to reach audiences, and instead think about embracing a language of possibility and empathy. And I think this extends far beyond COVID. It's about us embracing anti-racist education, and in my context, addressing the impact and complexities of empire. It's also about urgently responding to the climate emergency. And this is not unrelated to the mental health crisis. Indeed, I think it's only when we start to engage with many of the complex issues which will contribute to poor mental health that we will truly start to make a difference. Reframing how the arts care is critical. In our context, this means developing an ethics of care that extends beyond collections to people, ideas, beliefs, and relationships. Supporting ourselves and our communities, for example, to engage with not just the science of climate change, but the emotion of the climate emergency too. Becoming a space to express feelings and come together to create change, engage in debate, and critically to plan for action is how our future will evolve. And the student guide to the climate crisis that you see on your screen is written by two extraordinary young women, Pooja Kishanani and Marion Smith, two young students who we've been working with since lockdown started. We're now also developing a programme and resources with them, really focused on supporting climate anxiety and grief and building hope and action. And one of the ways that we might want to do this as part of our commitment to support better mental health is in our context to encourage nature connectedness. So back in summer 2020, we commissioned this piece, Wild Chorus. I'm going to play a short snip in a moment. It was recorded and composed in the summer of 2020. It reflects a moment of global quiet, blending field recordings of nature and sonified weather pattern data sets. In our confinement, we listened intently. And when we eventually reopen our doors, this piece will greet our audiences, who we hope will be carrying with them their experience of lockdown and their hopes for recovery. I'm going to play you a short snippet. entire piece can be downloaded from our website. Creating more moments of awe and joy, reconnecting us to each other and the world around us will be a critical role for the arts as we move forwards. But it will need more than awe and wonder for everything to be okay. If our institutions can become less transactional and more relational in their work, if we can endeavour to be more comfortable with the language of emotion, empathy, and vulnerability, if we can build new partnerships and collaborations across sectors and across places, and if we can care with, learn from, support, and actually catch up with the artists and our audiences, then we just might offer the narratives of hope, belonging, and connectedness that we all so desperately need. Thanks so much.
We thank Director Ward of Manchester Museum for her presentation. She explained to us a mental health, healthy and sound relationship that comes from the health as well as interaction with art. She also showed us how the museum evolved from its previous traditional role to flexibly adapt to changes of our time. I cannot but agree that now is the high time for art institutions to break the bad habits and tradition, not to engage in competition but to shift to new language for new possibilities for future. Her presentation gave us a lot of food for thought on how the art can work for society in this challenging time of the COVID pandemic. I hope that we can continue with this topic through the discussion later on. Now, let's move on to the second presentation, which will be delivered by Seonghee, Director of Obsin Festival. In the previous keynote presentation, we heard about colonization of art activities and the destruction of real, genuine collaboration. Director Kim will also present her perspectives on colonization rearing its ugly head in various scenes of international exchange and what efforts are needed to tackle this in this pandemic era.
안녕하세요. 저는 김성희입니다. 행사에 초대해 주셔서 감사합니다. 저는 예술 생태계와 국제 교류라는 제목으로 발제를 시작해 보겠습니다. 코로나 팬데믹은 우리로 하여금 삶을 총체적으로 성찰하는 계기를 주었습니다. 이에 최근 자연과 생태계를 재검토하고 지금까지 와는 다른 방식의 관계를 설정하려고 노력하는 예술가들이 등장하고 있습니다. 이들은 예술이 어떻게 제작되고 연습되고 소통되고 더 나아가서는 어떻게 시연되고 어떻게 경험되어야 할지 이 예술계 생태계 전반을 성찰하고 이러한 사유를 자연의 생태계까지 확장시켜서 예술의 다른 미래를 제안하고자 합니다. 이러한 논의는 스웨덴의 안무가 마텐 스팽크베르크가 이끌고 있는데요. 그는 자본주의의 가장 큰 특징인 주체성 생산에 대한 저항으로서 우리의 역할이 예술의 역할이 오히려 주체를 폐기하는 것에 있으며 오늘날 예술은 우리가 상상할 수 없는 것을 상상하게 해야 한다고 언급합니다. 그는 춤은 예술가의 주체 표현이 아니라 무심하게 관객을 풍경으로 자연으로 데려다주는 배나 바람과 같다고 제안합니다. 그의 신작 그들은 배경에 있는 야생의 자연을 생각했다라는 제목의 작품에서 이러한 사유를 잘 보여줍니다. 지금 보시는 사진의 오른쪽에는 서울에 있는 2명의 댄서가 있고요. 가운데와 왼쪽 사진에는 베를린의 한 명의 댄서, 런던의 한 명의 댄서, 이렇게 총 4명의 댄서가 4인물을 그 세 도시에서 진행하면서 하나의 안무를 완성하는 작품입니다. 그 서울에서 보시는 바와 같이 그 해가 지는 시간, 유럽은 또 반대로 해가 딱 뜨는 시간이죠. 이렇게 정확하게 같은 시간에 그 4인물을 시작하는데요. 이렇게 동기화가 되는 순간, 춤은, 기존의 춤을 보는 방식과 달리, 시각의 지배로부터 벗어나서 그 관객은 세 장소의 춤을, 동시에, 감각과 촉각으로, 경험하게 됩니다. 작품은, 안무가의 어떤 메시지라든지 아니면 무용수의 스펙타클한 몸짓보다는 관객이 풍경을 바라보고 감각하는 걸 의도함으로 여기서 그 풍경은 굉장히 중요한 요소입니다. 그래서 그 기획 단계에서 서울에 6개의 장소를 그 작가와 열심히 그 풍경을 찾았고 그 첫 번째 장소가 지금 보시는 그 난지 마리나입니다. 총 그 6회의 공연을 했고 매번 이제 다른 장소들에서 공연이 열렸고요. 그래서 이제 두 번째 장소가 보시는 바와 같이 이렇게 낙산공원, 세 번째 장소는 선유도, 네 번째 장소는 용산 가족공원으로 다른 장소가 굉장히 풍경적인 면에서 그 이 용산 가족공원은 마치 엄청나게 가족들이 많이 모이는 이런 공공장소인 게 굉장히 표시가 나는데요. 또 다음 장소는 물레예술공장의 옥상입니다. 그리고 마지막 장소가 덕수궁 돌담길이죠. 그래서 이제 덕수궁 인근인데요. 이렇게 마틴 스팡크버르그에 따르면 그 춤은 소유가 아닌 누구나 경험할 수 있는 공공의 것, 평평한 춤, 누구나 나눌 수 있는 시간과 공간이라고 그렇게 말하고 있는데요. 이렇게 그 공공장소에서, 전통적인 극장이 아닌 공공장소에서 관객들과 다른 방식으로 만나고 경험의 방식을 다르게 변화시키면서 기존의 그 예술에서 얘기하고 있는 그 예술가의 주체성의 표현이 아니라 자연과 풍경을 경험하게 해주는 예술의 다른 비전을 보여준다고 할 수 있겠습니다. 생태계와 관련해서 자본주의의 생산성이나 효율성, 이것은 마땅히 검토되어야 할 문제인데요. 이러한 그 자본주의의 생산성과 효율성에 대한 저항으로서 굉장히 고집스럽고 무모하게 쓸데없는 잉여를 끊임없이 생산하는 것으로서 그 저항을 하는, 그러나 그 생산이 이윤이 아니라 아름다움과 시를 생산해내는 그런 작가들이 있습니다. 그 중에서 그 노르웨이 출신의 안무가 메테 에드바르센의, 이것도 작품이 제목이 긴데, 그 오후의 햇살 아래 시간이 잠들었네. 매우 시적인 제목인데요. 그런 그 작품을 살펴보면, 일단 작품에서 퍼포머가 굉장히 중요해요. 퍼포머는 자신이 마음속 깊이 사랑하는 책을 조사도 빼놓지 않고 통째로 외웁니다. 그래서 살아있는 책이 되어서 도서관에 소장이 되고 그 도서관을 방문한 관객이 읽고 싶은 책을 고르면 그 책은 독자를 도서관의 어느 장소로 데려가거나 바깥에서 산책을 하면서 자신의 그 내용을 암송하는 작품입니다. 너무도 쓸모없는 짓이죠. 그 책을 통째로 한 권을 외운다는 것이 이 오늘날 뭐 돈이 되는 것도 아니고 어떤 이윤을 창출하는 것도 아닌데 굉장히 아까도 말씀드린 거와 마찬가지로 고집스럽고 무모하고 쓸모없는 잉여를 생산하는 아주 바로 딱 그 예에 딱 맞는 그러한 과정인 것 같습니다. 그래도 좀 제작 과정을 공유하는 게 좋을 것 같아서 짧게 이런 제작 과정을 보여주는 표를 준비해 왔는데 길게 볼 필요는 없을 것 같고요. 작품의 진행은 온라인 워크숍을 통해서 이런 방식으로 진행이 됐고요. 다음 사진은 이렇게 국내의 퍼포머들, 살아있는 책들끼리 그 현장 워크숍을 하는 장면입니다. 그렇게 돼서 만들어진 4명의 살아있는 책과 4권의 살아있는 책이 이제 만들어졌습니다. 그래서 첫 번째 지금 보시는 사진은 벨기에에서 온 편지라는 살아있는 책이고요. 지금 관객과 함께 극장 바깥의 어떤 공간에 앉아서 지금 책을 읽고 있는 장면입니다. 두 번째 장면은 극장의 창고입니다. 극장 창고에 둘이 지금 살아있는 책과 앉아서 거장과 마르가리타라는 책을 지금 감상하고 있는 중입니다. 세 번째 작업은 이거는 지금 물레예술공장의 그 극장 옆편인데요. 거기가 되게 공교롭게도 비행기가 지나가는 그 항로에 있다고 해요. 그래서 가끔씩 이렇게 비행기가 지나가고 있는데 그 장소에서 야간 비행, 그 장소를 선택해서 야간 비행이라는 책을 생텍쥐베리의 야간 비행이라는 책을 읽고 있는 장면입니다. 마지막으로 그 한국의 책이죠. 그 페르도는 극장 그 로비에 이렇게 보시는 바와 같이 햇빛 아래서 책을 읽게 됩니다. 이렇게 마텐 스팽크베르크와 그 메테 에르바센의 작품은 모두 그 코로나 팬데믹으로 인해서 그 해외 초청 공연이 불가능해진 상황에서 진행되었고, 오히려 이제 그러한 상황이 국제 제작의 의미와 그 방법론을 검토하는 계기가 되었고, 그러한 국제 교류에 대한 그런 그 성찰을 통해서 그런 다른 국제 교류의 방식, 매우 흥미로운 방식을 보여주고 있다고 할 수 있겠습니다. 제게 이러한 예술 생태계에 대한 고민은 자연스럽게 그 기술과 가상 영역으로 확장됩니다. 오늘날 우리는 대부분의 시간을 온라인, 스마트폰, 게임, 소셜 미디어, 더 나아가서는 넷플릭스 등에서 그 가상과 실제 사이를 오가며 보내죠. 거의 현실에서의 시간만큼 아마도 가상 세계에서 시간을 보내고 있는 것 같아요. 이렇게 일상에서 볼거리가 넘쳐나고 누구나 나도 예술가인 시대에 콘텐츠 창작은 더는 예술가의 고유한 영역이 아닌 듯이 보입니다. 그렇다면 오늘날 저녁에 극장에 가서 그 무대 위 연극을 감상한다는 것의 의미는 무엇일까요? 연극은 다른 시공간의 차원으로 확장될 수 있을까요? 이러한 질문들이 제기됩니다. 김지선 작가의 슬픔의 집이라는 작품은 그 극장 공간을 가상 공간으로 확장시킬 수 있는 그 가능성을 시도한 좋은 사례입니다. 이 작품은 온라인 게임 그 마인크래프트 속에서 작가 스스로 가상의 극장을 짓고 그 속에서 공연을 진행한 작품입니다. 작품 내용은 보여드릴 수가 없고 이 작품의 트레일러를 잠깐 보도록 하겠습니다. 네, 또 다른 사례로 에란겔 다크 투어 이벤트가 있습니다. 이것은 그 온라인 게임 그 배틀그라운드 속에서 그 진행되는 이벤트로 원래 이 배틀그라운드는 지금 사진에 보는 이게 원래 배틀그라운드의 홍보 사진인데요. 이렇게 보시는 것처럼 그 한 명이 생존할 때까지 서로를 쏴 죽여야만 하는 서바이벌 게임이라고 하면서 굉장히 폭력적인 게임입니다. 이러한 그 게임에 근데 이제 여기서 진행되는 그 이벤트는 에란겔 다크 투어라는 제목으로 진행이 되는데, 이 이벤트는 이제 그러한 폭력적인 게임의 속에 들어가서 그런 게임의 룰에서 벗어나 게임 속에서 참여한 100명의 관객이 오히려 그 안에 페어들을 다크 투어 하는 거죠. 그 풍경 속에서 그런 것들을 바라보면서 어떤 연대의 과제를 수행하면서 공동체의 가능성을 실험하는 그런 이벤트입니다. 코로나 팬데믹 상황에서 대부분 스트리밍이라든지 유튜브 등 그런 가상 공간을 굉장히 도구적으로 접근하는 게 일반적인 사례인데, 이 이벤트는 극장 공간이라는 생태계, 예술의 생태계를 검토하고 그러한 극장 공간의 확장으로서 가상 공간을 접근하는 지점이 흥미롭다고 생각했습니다. 이제 초점을 좀 더 국제 교류로 맞춰보겠습니다. 먼저 국제 교류에 잠재된 타자적 시선을 짚고 넘어가고자 합니다. 20세기 서구의 발명품, 중요한 것이죠. 주체와 타자. 그리고 이 주체는 아까 맨 앞에 마탱 스팽크베르크의 사유와도 연결되어 있는데요. 어쨌든 그 주체와 타자, 이것은 서구를 중심에 위치시키고 그 바깥을 타자로 규정하는 이분법적이고 위계적인 사유 방식입니다. 보시는 이 이미지는 인간동물원 사진입니다. 19세기에서 20세기에 인종차별, 식민주의에 기인해서 비서구인들을 동물원에 가둬놓고 전시하고 서구 관람객들이 와서 구경하던 그런 굉장히 야만적인 행동입니다. 우리는 여기서 주목해야 될 것이 타자를 바라보는 식민주의적 시선에 주목해야 합니다. 이러한 시선은 20세기, 21세기 아직 끝나지 않았습니다. 바로 그 지점을 브렛 베일리는 비전시에서 아직도 이러한 타자적 시선은 끝나지 않았음을 비평적으로 질문하고 있는 작품의 사진을 지금 제가 보여드리고 있습니다. 과거 국제 교류가 이렇게 이국적이고 굉장히 민속 문화를 적극적으로 소개하고 이를 문화 교류의 방식으로 채택했던 때가 있었고 아직도 일부 진행 중인 것으로 알고 있습니다. 이러한 주체와 타자를 이분법적으로 구분하는 근대주의적 사유 방식은 오늘날 더 이상 유효하지 않을 뿐더러 이미 앞전에 얘기했듯이 많은 아티스트들도 주체를 폐기해야 하는 지점까지 지금 주체를 폐기해야 한다고까지 주장하고 있습니다. 그러한 예술계에서는 하지만 이제 그동안 그러한 예술계에서는 이러한 국제교류에 잠재된 이러한 식민주의적 시선에 대해서 스스로 통렬한 성찰을 해왔습니다. 이를 통해서 오늘날 세계를 평평하게 인식하고 서로가 서로를 바라보고 그 차이를 존중하는 방식으로 국제교류가 나아가고 있습니다. 이것이 우리가 믿고 있는 인터내셔널리즘, 국제주의고 이러한 국제주의가 우리의 책무라고 생각합니다. 그러나 최근 다시 민족주의, 자국중심주의, 인종주의가 부상하고 있고 코로나 팬데믹은 이를 강화하는 그런 조건을 만들고 있습니다. 예술은 이러한 분리와 고립으로부터 저항해야 하며 그 어느 때보다도 국제주의를 고집해야 한다고 생각합니다. 저는 최근 The Reconstruction of the World라는 국제 컨퍼런스를 접하게 되었는데 이 컨퍼런스는 무너진 세계 질서를 재구축하기 위해서 원조, 연대, 정치의 관계를 밝히고자 하는 그런 컨퍼런스였습니다. 흥미로운 점은 초국가 페미니스트 운동, 기후정의, 인종주의 운동, 민주화 운동과 같은 초국가적 연대의 실천을 통해서 그 정치를 갱신하자고 제안하는 것 같았습니다. 여기서 저는 그 초국가적 연대에 관심을 갖게 되었습니다. 물론 우리는 활동가가 아니라 예술가인 만큼 예술이 할 일을 해야 하고 예술이 할 수 있는 방법을 찾아야 한다고 생각합니다. 이러한 그 사회 번역을 위한 그 예술의 역할은 과연 무엇일지요? 아마도 이러한 연대의 가능성을 상상케 하는 일이 아닐까 생각합니다. 여기서 국제교류는 매우 중요한 역할을 해야 할 것이라고 생각하고 이러한 그 초국가적인 연대의 장을 향한 국제교류를 희망하면서 발표를 마치도록 하겠습니다. 감사합니다.
Again, that was a very insightful presentation by Seonghee Kim, director of Opsin Festival. Especially, she emphasized that we have to retrospect on pre-COVID international exchange with critical perspectives in order to ensure international exchange promoting mutual respect for differences and resist the temptation of falling into ethnicism and nation-centered mindset. She also emphasized the need to get away from dichotomy of subject versus others to pursue cross-national solidarity through art. We would like to talk more about it during the discussion session. Moving on to the third presentation, Valentijn Byvanck, director of Mares House for Culture in the Netherlands, will introduce one of the Mares' program where audiences are not at a standstill to view art pieces. Rather, in the program, they are stimulated and enlivened to experience sensual and sensory recognitions. So let's watch the video.
Hello everyone, my name is Valentijn Byvanck. I'm director of Mares, a house for contemporary culture in Maastricht, the Netherlands. And today I'd like to talk to you about the relationship between the home and experience. We've all spent a lot of time at home in the last year, and we've all been longing for experience. But do we really know what that experience is? And can we talk about how cultural institutions need to deal with that experience? First of all, I think it's important to point out that there's always been an opposition between the home and experience. The home has always been a place of refuge, a place of routines, a place of rest and comfort. And if you want to have an experience, you need to leave the house. And this is borne out, or maybe better said, played back by advertisement all the time. If you want to sell a kitchen interior, you talk about comfort and efficiency, not experience. But if you talk about holidays, you talk about discovery and adventure. That is the world of experience. And I think we've come to realize that even though that opposition always existed, it has shifted in the last year. And one of the reasons for that is we've come to see that the house has become our eternal digital hangout. We do everything online. We shop online, we have meetings online, we work online, we have drinks with our friends online nowadays, and of course we find partners online. And that seems really wonderful, doesn't it? Actually, it's not. Mares organized a series of programs online in the last year, and participants were always very happy with it, that something happened. And at the end, they always said, now please get us back into the real world. They were looking for an experience. And is that experience something that public institutions can do something with? That's what we're going to find out. But let me first tell you a little bit about Mares. Mares is a house for contemporary culture. And we emphasize the word culture because we believe the world is full of artistic practices of all kinds of sorts, and we all want to give them, or as many as possible, a home in Mares. Mares inhabits a very beautiful villa in the old historic center of Maastricht. We have one of the biggest public gardens in the city, and we have a very popular Syrian Sicilian restaurant to which I welcome you all if you have a chance. Now we make exhibitions, we signal new artistic practices, we follow artists in all kinds of fields, so visual arts, music, theater, dance, even cooking. But maybe the most important thing is that we distinguish ourselves by having a program on the senses and body knowledge. And this focus on the senses bridges the world of contemporary art and everyday experience, but it's also our way of bringing the body back into the exhibition room. Now, the most iconic museum image, and you all recognize it immediately, of course, is a still body contemplating a work of art. The body is captured, in a way silenced by the artwork. And ironically, the artist Mark Rothko was himself a huge fan of music. So I remember I saw 6 or 7 years ago at the Tate Modern this painting with the score of Duke Ellington being played in the exhibition space. And yet the Tate did not encourage visitors to start dancing in front of the painting, to sway their bodies as to perhaps understand the work of art in another or a better way, or perhaps as a way to empathize with the artist. And why is that? Because the dominant discourse, of course, still suggests that the body doesn't add to interpretation. There's no significant knowledge to add to what we can already see and think. In the museum, the body is a vehicle of transportation from one gallery to the next. Now, this worldview in which the body should remain a still container is actually tilting. Modern studies emphasize the knowing body and, in fact, stress the fact that our bodies are immense reservoirs of separate knowledges. And if that sounds abstract to you, it might be good to think about all the things that you do without thinking. So we're all write or play the piano without thinking about our hands. We all select fruit with our noses and fingers. We discriminate between textiles with our fingers. You could say we select partners with our noses. But maybe most importantly, we have this thing called intuition that counsels us in endless situations without the brain interfering. I think it would be beautiful if art institutions explore this aspect of our sensory experience of our world. But we're not the only place to do it. I mean, we understand that we do it because the arts have always laid claim on the sensory perception of the world. But we're not the only ones, because we see that institutions for higher learning and let's say, for instance, medical schools are lamenting the fact that young professionals lack perception methods to do their jobs well. We all need to train our senses to have a better perception of the world and do our jobs better. Now, one thing is to say that our bodies are reservoirs of immense knowledges, but we all know that we're hardly aware of it. And in fact, you could say we go through life sleepwalking a lot of the time. And the reason for this is this beautiful instrument that I now call visual continuum. What is that? Picture yourself getting into a cab in a summer in New York City. One moment, your body is immersed in a big city with traffic noises, flickering neon lights, and the smells of gasoline and burned pretzels. And the next moment, you get into the cab, and the body is comforted by a still environment with, if you're lucky, pleasant Indian song, muted light, a sweet fragrance, a driver who asks you where you're going, or radio providing the listener with the latest baseball news. And not for a second do you think that this is an experience that asks for deep adjustment to a fully different world. Isn't that strange? We don't find it strange at all. We create a visual continuum that smoothens out, like in a film, all possible disruptions. And now you think, I recognize this is an incident. No, this is structurally how we organize our experiences and protect ourselves from stimuli and go through our everyday world. But now the task of public institutions like ours, art institutions, is of course to address this sensory system, and that is to wake up visitors to the idea that artistic practices and indeed life consists of full sensory experiences. The question only is, how do you craft a project to activate the body and give free realm to the senses? And Maurice designed 2 programs for this that I'm going to talk about. And one is a public program that focuses on training the body to know. And the other is an exhibition program that focuses on direct experience. And before I start telling you about, I want to give you this picture of the swimming pool. Because to open up the full range of the senses requires a specific filtering of stimuli. And I think it's very important to notice what happens when you shut your eyes and drown the body, literally. So dive into a pool and you realize that underwater your eyes won't help you a lot, your ears won't either. But your skin opens up all its pores to a new reality in this new world you entered. Marès invites artists to make full environment art installations. So think of installations that fill the entire house and actually swallow the visitors into a landscape of shifting perspectives, of uncharted walking routes, and artworks that meander like vines from room to room, connecting walls, floors, and ceiling. Typically, these exhibitions lack wall chats or other signs that may instruct the visitors what to do or to think. Often only a very limited number of visitors are allowed in at the same time, sometimes only one or two. And at other times they are asked to remove their shoes, to hand in their mobile phones, to go slowly because of the darkness. So there is a conditioning of the visitor going on. And the exhibitions are quite overwhelming. They transform the house into a Baroque city palace, a dense jungle, a roof landscape, a museum for life movement, a concert hall, or an inhabitant domestic home. And Marès offers the visitors a path into these new worlds. And as one critic wrote, this was to rediscover functions of our physical knowing which we have forgotten or unlearned. And I'm going to show you 3 short clips of exhibitions we organized. The first one of the artist Levi van Velu, who built an almost 400 square meters labyrinth for the House of Marès that showed itself as 9 dark, beautiful, and mysterious rooms, abandoned craft spaces, furniture submerged in a reflecting pool, long corridors with shelves full of identical objects, and so on. And as a result of this limited visibility, visitors needed to use their bodies to find their way. They touched, kneeled, squatted, blew, and sometimes they just stood still for a while to feel their surroundings with their skin. Think about the swimming pool. Most visitors appeared from the installation speechless, and some were afraid, and others told us they felt at times stood still, yet others they felt distant to the world, experienced sudden temperature changes, sounds or lack of sounds, and smells. In The Painted Bird, 20 artists painted the entire House of Marès with their dreams and nightmares of Europe. This last trailer was of the exhibition Dreaming Awake, for which the Brazilian artist Luiz Zerbini made this beautiful painting, as he called it, with earth and sand and a lot of flowers and trees and shrubs. Effectively, we planted a full jungle on the ground floor. So that was an amazing experience for visitors in this entirely lush and fragrant reality they stepped into. And I think for all three of the things that I showed you, you can see that, or you can understand that the body was triggered to do all kinds of things. So to wake up to realities with sensory perceptions that are not usual for a museum visit. So people, visitors found themselves lost. They experienced all kinds of temperature changes, perception problems, time things that they otherwise, perhaps in a museum, wouldn't do. And most importantly, they really felt like they stepped into another reality in another world. A bit like the experience they wouldn't have when they would step into a cab in New York City. And there's this philosopher, Alfonso Lingus, that explains a little bit what happens, because he says to have a sensation, to have a strong perception, in fact, is often like a shortcut. So we live in tamed environments until we suddenly get this electrical current that suddenly wakes us up and activates our body to come into this new reality and make us conscious of the fact that this perception is actually giving us other messages, or messages outside the visual continuum. So I think maybe this is then the first part, where you see that you can wake up and activate the body. And the second program I want to say a few things about is about, if you've activated and people do become conscious of their body, how then do you work with that body? So how do you work with the knowledges of that body that now come to you? And this program is Training the Senses. The Training the Senses series is a monthly meeting of scholars, scientists, artists, makers, and the public, where we explore together the nature of experience. And basically we try to figure out what is it that constitutes experience to the people that need that experience to really make things. They're not allowed to do PowerPoints or presentations for captured bodies. So they're a constant way of searching for how to give experience to another person through experience, so through workshops, everything practical. And of course, we all have certain experience. I mean, we're maybe not all famous chefs, but we all cook. So we do know that there's knowledges that you can't put into words or to language. And the only mastery of the skill is possible when you train the body to do certain things. And training means that you work together with people that use their bodies to do certain things, that already have the knowledge of the body that you need because they've trained for it. And in our training program, we invite choreographers and dancers that demonstrate how the body produces expression. We invite musicians, surgeons, and cooks to let us feel the ways in which they hone their skills with instruments. Neuroscientists and smell experts explore with us the difficulty of translating sensations into vocabularies. And composers and sound experts let us hear the relationships between sound, space, and experience. And every monthly meeting is like a practical workshop, but also a total discovery tour of people coming into the knowledge of the body, trying to experience something that they didn't experience before. And also for the people who come to present very interesting workshops. Because the public plays a very important way modeling the sessions. They're steering, in fact, the practical experiments in the direction that they want. So they model the sessions in a way. And I guess the point is here that the public comes to understand things by doing them, and that everybody can be of help. We worked with puppeteers, actors, magicians, psychologists, chemical food specialists, mosquito breeders, poetry slammers, and all of this, as one anthropologist who was there a lot, to find out new ways of doing scholarship and education in the wild, a form of anthropology where learning, sensing, and training happens in everyday encounters. Now, very, very important, our senses can be trained. We can wake up the body and activate it, but we can, after that, we can train it, and we can train our sensitivity to a point where we're more attuned to our environment all the time, and the body will become a knowing body rather than a still one. I've started this presentation saying that the home is actually a world of routine and a world of very few surprises. And I think I said something about the online world that we've gotten into more than ever in the last year. And one of the important things to notice, I think, is that what online presence or an online life brings, it actually routinizes the world of experience, whether that's shopping or finding partners or work, everything outside the home. When it happens online, you smoothen it out into a visual continuum of the home where there's no surprises. And I think we spend now enough time in the home. Now we need to go back to experience. And for museums and cultural institutions, they should not follow the trend to make everything more homely and everything more routinized and everything more online. Of course, they need to organize lots of online programs. But at the same time, they better explore and examine very deeply what this longing for experience is and what museums and public institutions can bring in terms of real experience. Because obviously, if they stay the conditioned institutions they are, where you move from painting to painting and room to room, and I'm not saying that everybody does that, they are creating something that is so akin to the home that they don't cater to this longing, where that is what people are going to search outside the home. And I think it would be very worthwhile if institutions reach out to this sensory potential of their visitors, try to cater to it, and there's a million ways to do it. I've just given examples for Maurice, but there's a million ways to do that, and to see if they, in this way, can enrich a cultural experience to a sensory experience by immersing visitors, by activating their bodies to making them conscious of all this rich potential that they have, and train their bodies to become not only maybe people that appreciate art in a much richer way, but appreciate themselves as humans and citizens of this world in a richer and more powerful way. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was the presentation by Director Valentijn. As people have had to stay at home for a long predicted time, there is a strong pent-up desire for experiences. And culture and art institutions, therefore, should provide experiences that can wake up and activate the audience's body, and also try to form relationship in a different way from what they pursued before. So far, we have had the 3 presentations. Now, we would like to move on to the discussion session. For today's discussion, we have 2 designated discussants. So first of all, from the Thought Creative producer group, we have the producer Jisun Park. And we also have one more designated discussant. So Jian, Artistic Director from TheatreWorks, is also joining us online. So we would like to first hear from the Jian for her remarks.
Hello. Nice to meet everybody. It was great to have seen your presentation. And perhaps I start with doing a little bit of an introduction about myself. I am the artistic director of a company in Singapore called the TheatreWorks. We are just starting our 56th year of existence. In 1965, right before Singapore was actually established as a country, practice was formed. So we had our roots actually in as a school. It was a training institute. Teaching performing arts. And then in 1986, the professional arm of the company was formed. So advocacy and education has very much been in our DNA, even though today a lot of people see us as a theater company. So in that sense, the company exists not particularly dedicated to any form. Through the 55 years of evolving, things have changed quite a bit. But at the heart of it, human has always been the focus. So that's why these three presentations that we saw was especially connected very closely to what we explore. So for us in 2020, we were about to start a show which is like a promenade theater piece. And it was supposed to be a 30-show run. 2 days, 2 shows, and then we were shut down. And at that point, there was about 100 people on the payroll of the show. And there was no end in sight how long the pandemic was going to be. From that point onwards, there was a lot of rethinking. For us, a lot of rethinking about, our relationship with our staff, with our artists, with our audiences. We ask ourselves how we can be useful and how can we empower at this time when it's very, very disempowering. So for the last year, we have been doing a lot of digital pivoting or transformation. We've pivoted for 2 main reasons. One is to save jobs. And the other reason is to create access to the arts. Because a lot of people, families were stuck at home. So that's where we started doing family entertainment. Schools were stuck. We couldn't go in. They couldn't come out. So we streamed over 80 shows to schools last year. And then artists were stuck because creation has evolved so much that we had to find out again, what creation was about. And then, so we created boot camp for playwrights and for artists. We also did, the most epic thing was a 55-hour live streaming to celebrate our 55th anniversary. But regardless of all this content, there's an ongoing effort to think and reflect because there is really no going back. So I think in this 3 presentation, what struck me the most is the consideration of leadership or what leaders need to do or think about or consider during this period of time. So I'm going to start with some thoughts from Seonghee's presentation. I think it's very, very hard to hang on to any kind of a relationship as we knew, especially international exchanges. But at the same time, the world is also getting smaller. So for the first time, the world has been facing the same challenges. We have had the same experiences. And it's unprecedented. When somebody says, "Can you hear me?" we know all what they're talking about, right? So this universal human experience, for me, is as close as we have all collectively experienced in this last year. So my thought, is after listening to Seonghee's presentation is, how do we collectively harness what this, how do we harness these collective experiences? But it is very encouraging to be reminded of this utopian vision of how we need to be more equitable, how empowerment has to be thinking in a different way, different approach, has to be reimagined. Valentijn, thank you for bringing a very different perspective to museum experiences. I don't think I necessarily always associate that kind of, it's almost like theater, except, the entry point was very different. I think you reminded me a lot of what we are deprived of in this pandemic. I think as arts practitioner, we have always been dealing with this sense of anxiety when all these things stopped. Can you hear me? Right? It's a different way of can you hear me? So many of us scrambled to create digital content, but some was innovating to bridge and overcome these restrictions. And then others were innovating because it's simply a new form of art making an experience. So your presentation made me reflect on which is it for me? Which is it for us? Why do we explore this digital domain and what is its connection to the live experiences? How do we, make use of the best of both worlds? Esme, I think what you said about motion sickness really resonated with me. And I straight away thought about motion blur. And it's one of those things where I think in the past, things always move so fast for most of us that we don't have the clarity and we just see this motion blur most of the time. So the last year has a lot been about stopping and at least slowing down. So some clarity hopefully would come out of it. And also it made me remember how this clarity was so important and so lacking in many of our day-to-day existence. I was in a ISPA Congress talk that was, one of the participants was the Vice President and Artistic Director of Social Impact at Kennedy Center, Mark Bamuthi Joseph. And he mentioned an idea of public health that a lot of us talk about. But he said, we talk about health, we rarely talk about public healing. And I think that in your talk reminded me of that conversation because there is this, acceptance and admitting about our vulnerability, especially us as art makers. And I think that is very important that we start with that, accepting that that's who we are before we can care for the vulnerable, outer circles as we go out. I especially connected the idea of culture of care. Is that can you hear me? And it's yes, I can hear you. So there's this expansion of self to community, to the world or nature, was very much the through line for me. So in that sense, it was very nourishing to listen to all three talks, and that was a wonderful mirror also on my own practice. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Director Ko Jian-hong, for your great questions and comments. You raised questions to the three presenters. We will first move on to the second part of the discussion before addressing the questions raised. Now I'd like to turn to producer Jisun Park of producer group DOT. Thank you very much. I'm Jisun Park, producer. I would like to thank the keynote speaker as well as the three presenters. As mentioned before, it was such a great time for me to consider the challenges at hand. I came to see once again that we who are still living under the impact of the pandemic have similar questions and think hard about life and art and the breakthrough for them. In 2020, I held a dialogue titled New Connection with 15 international artists and dialogue and works responding to climate change in collaboration with artists and curators. The keywords we identified through such a dialogue and work are pretty much the same as what today's presentations covered. Fundamental questions about art way of existence and its role as social activity and the importance of change. The importance of moving away from the colonialist view, which sets the subject apart from others in the relationship between man and nature, in addition to the view on international exchange. The importance of transnational solidarity. Emerging questions about international mobility from the perspective of climate change and ecology. That is, green mobility and deep mobility, the possibility of expanding the reality connected to the virtual world and new methodologies. We try to explore the future of art with the reality confronting us. As I listened to the presentations, I came to see that we are entering into the time of transition where hope and pessimistic views are mixed than any other time. COVID-19 hit everyone around the globe, all at the same time. Looking at what is taking place on the globe, we realize that we are in the same place, same time. So I think we are all standing at the starting point. However, over time, the capitalist reasoning and logic started to operate, aggravating exploitation of the minorities of society, as Dr. Keng mentioned in his keynote. Colonialization is well underway. With the pandemic, how important it is to break free from the colonialist view has been highlighted, and voices calling for change and awareness regarding hierarchy that breeds violence are rising. While the possibilities for digital democracy and virtual world which can expand the reality, the alt-right and nationalism are rising, raising their ugly head again, generating hatred. As access to information becomes a power, colonialization and hierarchization are being exposed. What we are going to choose and practice will determine what the future will be like and will hold. Turning to international exchange, over the last year, we carried out exchange and communication not across borders but on digital platforms. There have been various virtual formats for cooperation. Do we need to continue international exchange even when borders are closed and there is a threat to health and safety? Why do we need to be engaged in exchange? These questions are in line with the fundamental question asking about the role of arts. Over the last decade, international exchange has been discussed within the state-driven market structure, at least in Korea. But as mentioned in presentations, now is the time for us to ask why is it important to be international? Why we need to be international? Exchange allows us to experience other perspectives and expands our world. We need to move away from the comfort zone and deal with contemporary issues through international solidarity based on new perspectives and multifaceted understanding. Today's theme is relationships, connections, and exchange in the time of the pandemic. In relation to the presentations, I would like to discuss further about relationships. Before COVID-19, one of the things done in all artistic activities was relationship forming among participants, whether it is performance, exhibition, or festival. The web of relationship forming among and between people made a space real, enabling real experiences. As Mr. Valentijn Byvanck mentioned, to prevent the world of experience from becoming routinized and to regain the audience confidence and bring them back to the space of experience to performing theaters and museums and galleries, what kind of preparations needs to be done by the public field? And what kind of roles need to be fulfilled by the public organizations and institutions as well as the culture and art organizations in order to invite them back to this world of experience? What do we need to do? Well, this is the matter I'd like to discuss further. And as for the international exchange, I'd like to ask my question to Director Seonghee Kim. One of the presenters said the new normal is applied to how art production is outsourced. With the shutdown of the borders last year, so a great deal of outsourcing of art productions. I totally agree with the description that this is another form of colonization and the collapse of collaboration. I expect to see more of such way of collaboration in order to realize green mobility, and I would like to hear from the presenters what we need to do in order to prevent colonization in the process of collaboration of such. No artist, without being physically engaged in the local context, this kind of outsourcing, do we have to accept this as a form of international exchange in the post-COVID era? And in doing such a collaboration, what do we need to do in order to prevent colonization in the process of collaboration of such? Last but not least, as for the international exchange, the discussion on green mobility traced back several years, but the pandemic has accelerated the discussion. In discussing international cooperation in the post-COVID era, many say we should adopt deep mobility in order to reduce carbon footprint, that is, rather than staying 1 or 2 nights or presenting one session of a performance, if you are to visit another country, the work should be driven by and based on local research. Although we talk about green mobility or deep mobility to mitigate carbon footprint, we need to consider artists whose livelihood is sustained by tour. How should funding institutions and public arts institutions address the mobility of artists in the post-COVID era? In addition to the perspective of green mobility and deep mobility, how should the supporting scheme and structure change? I'd like to hear from the presenters. In my dialogue with international artists and curators, one of my friends from Belgium was shared with me a quote written by one working for Onassis Culture Center in Athens, Greece. It goes, "We are experiencing the acceleration of trends. Previously, we talked about instability of the artistic community, green mobility, inclusivity, and fair cooperation. But now is the time for us to consider how to overcome such acceleration, to go beyond that, to create a new framework of change and new schemes so that discussion leads to create a long-term way of thinking. Green mobility, fair treatment, inclusivity, these are the keywords I'd like to share with you in concluding my comment. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Now we would like to have some discussions with the presenters and discussants. And also for those who are now watching this online symposium, if you do have any questions, then you can also participate and raise your questions online. So the two designated discussants gave us their views and also questions. So starting with the first discussant, or rather the first presenter, Esme Ward, I would like to turn the microphone to the Esme Ward, the first presenter. While we are engaging in this kind of discussion, we are actually joining online in a virtual setting with the physical distances. We are talking about new types of the connections, the exchanges, and relationship. And regarding the two designated discussants, a comment, I would like to hear from the Esme Ward on what you think about the two discussants' comments.
Okay, thanks so much. Well, I suppose going first up, really, I suppose one of the comments related very directly to the culture of care and how we might build a culture of care, and I think some of the inherent challenges within building that culture of care, and not least actually how through a lens that focuses on measuring our impact, how we do that and how we sustain ourselves and communicate and advocate effectively for the kind of relational work that we're trying to build. So I wanted to really address that, and I suppose I've worked around the field of arts and health for a long time now, and I feel there's very few methodologies out there that we haven't tried. I also did a secondment to a public health team in my city to look at how the role of arts and culture could be embedded within the broader population health plans. And I wanted to just really share my experience of that because I think it's got some very interesting insights. So what I really discovered when I spent that time with lots of colleagues who are working in health and clinical contexts is that what they really wanted from the arts, being frank, is they wanted us to be more ourselves. They wanted us to stop trying to use clinical language, to stop trying to measure ourselves on the terms of others, to really draw on lived experience and build relationships with people and come up with new forms of understanding impact. And the language that they particularly used and they valued was around empathy and vulnerability. And actually, it struck me when Valentijn was talking delight and experience. This goes to the absolute heart of what the arts can do. So for me, how we sustain and we communicate and advocate, I'd like to see us be more ourselves. We're extraordinary storytellers. I'd like us to have the confidence to do that and actually build our networks. So the Culture, Health and Wellbeing Alliance that I'm chair of now has over 5,000 members who come from across sectors, who essentially, that whole organisation is driven by the power of our collective power of our members, and we coalesce around a shared vision, which is really simple. It's a healthy world powered by creativity and imagination. So for me, I think seeking our fellow travellers, building new kinds of partnerships and relationships with them, that will sustain us. And then listening to the artists and stepping into that space and not changing the way that we articulate our value to the tune of a medical or clinical model, but instead being confident of the impact that we know we can have on others, and creating the space for them to share that impact seems critical to me.
Thank you very much for your comment. In new era, for new generation, there will be more functions to be performed by art. Now I'd like to turn to Ms. Seonghee Kim for her comment. So one of the most important issues when it comes to international exchange is equitable collaboration and the expansion of collaboration under a new standard and new criteria. You must have some expectations as well as the challenges confronting you. ㅍDiscussion have shared with us their questions, so I'd like to hear from you on those questions. As for the method or approaches to international exchange, there can be many different ideas and views. And depending on the idea or views, you might agree with me or not. So I am representing myself only. I'm not to share with you a general opinion representing any specific group or society. To share with you my own personal idea, what Dr. Keng shared with us, I think one of the key points is collaboration. New normal, collaboration, outsourcing. Well, moving beyond those issues, I'd like to raise some issue over collaboration. So far, collaboration has been institution-driven and institutions-led or government project-driven. As a result, we have seen many government-led or state-driven collaboration projects. So regardless of the intent of the artist to join the project or not, they would have to follow this framework of collaboration. So they are forced to work within such given conditions. That's what I have seen so far in many occasions. Of course, we might have some hierarchical order between the southern hemisphere and the northern hemisphere, and there might be some economical hierarchy as well, or gender hierarchy. I agree with that. However, I think it is quite difficult for us to take the conditions for the collaboration away from such hierarchy, especially if collaboration is an opportunity given from the outside. I'm not sure whether that's really healthy or not, whether that's really good for an artist or not. So that's the area I have some doubt continuously. Of course, a certain artist, well, in consideration of the characteristics of the contemporary art, since it's very multi-layered and it includes various aspects, since one specific artist cannot own all the technologies and all the skills and all different aspects of knowledge required. So in the case that artists should invite others from other areas or sectors, well, I'm not talking about that kind of collaboration, but the collaboration I'm talking about here is curator-led or project-driven or institution-centric designed international exchange collaboration project given to an artist to work within such a set frame, and then they are forced to do this collaboration under this hierarchy. And that issue of a hierarchy is not just about economic status or gender status. I think this issue is coming from this set predetermined frame. So if the collaboration doesn't start from an artist, based on my own experience, does not produce any good results. And based on my own experience and understanding, at least for my own production, I do not impose such conditions to artists who work with me. So that's the direction I pursue. So I'm not saying that all the collaboration is wrong, but at least as for me, in the early days, there are so many funding programs for international collaboration and exchange. In order to access the international market, I looked for various funding schemes, and most of the funding schemes have this condition for collaboration. And if you get funds and grants from such a scheme, you'd face a lot of challenges and obstacles, and the outcome is not really desirable or healthy. You do not actually feel this great sense of achievement. So in that sense, the collaboration within the framework of international exchange, I think we need to raise some issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So that was the comment by the director Kim, and she talked about the cooperation in the set frame or collaboration, some structural issues behind the collaboration work, things that we need to reconsider. So she pointed out some problems, and as you know, even at this symposium, the relationship between artists and audiences, or between artists and the planners and directors. I believe that now is the time for us to redefine such relationship and expand and transform the relationship. So the efforts are now underway, and in this situation, in this time, she actually posed a very important questions to all of us. Later, I think we can continue with this topic for further discussion. But before that, we would like to hear from some other presenters. So regarding the discussants' comments and questions, we would like to hear the responses from the Valentijn Byvanck, director of Maris. So the director, Byvanck, you have the microphone.
Yes, hello. I think there's been a lot of questions on the table. I don't think I can respond to all of them. but maybe one of the first questions that was being asked is how exactly, well, actually, there's two questions that maybe I should try to say something about. One is the relationship between the digital and the experiential realm. In my presentation, I might have given the impression that the digital realm is not as good as the real. But for me, it's very important to say that all the drive in this society is towards an online existence. And without saying that I have something against it, we need to understand that for the consciousness of the body, of the presence in the world, that online reality brings us something else than a real experience. And what we see is that we can, in fact, lead a life almost entirely online. And yet people are getting all kinds of ailments if they're going to follow that life entirely. And we don't reflect a lot on what that body is actually telling us most of the time. And I think in the Netherlands, and I think it's probably true for Western Europe, our curricular system is not focused on the body at all. So the thing is, all the knowledge we get and all the things that we learn are basically located in between our visual capacities and our brain. So we see and we think and we think and we see. And what we're trying to do in our very sort of small way is try to bring the body back into the system. So we try to say online, we're not saying online is bad. We're just saying, in addition to that online reality, we have to also return to the body and see what knowledge that body can deliver to us. And I have a bit of an issue with museums that seem to follow their contemplative route and only use the exact replica of what already is happening in society and say, you move from artwork to artwork, you read the wall chats, you understand what's going on, and you move on without having any questions about where is the artwork, where is the space in which it is produced, and who are you that you're looking at this artwork in this space? So it's never questioned actually what your role is, and maybe interesting that you compared it to the theater in your first comment, because it's the interesting thing about the immersive exhibition is that sometimes visitors aren't clear about whether they need to play an active role, which is exactly where we want to get them. First, they don't know exactly where they are, and then they don't know how they should behave. And I think I had a politician who came to give a speech at an opening, and he saw just a little bit before, he saw the work, and we were walking down the stairs, and he said, I have no idea what this is about. And I congratulated him, and I said, how many times can you say that to yourself? You know, that you come into situations that you really don't understand what's going on. How important it is for us to do these things. Let me link it up, if I can, a little bit to the other big question that is being asked here, that is between the global and the local, because of course our online existence also is a global existence. It is the way in which we can communicate and exchange with everybody in the world, and I think it's very important. And it's very beautiful that all of this can happen. But I also think that we should pay a lot of attention on what happens to all our local specificities and local talents and local, maybe I even may call it cultures, that cannot be expressed in the same way online as when it can be if you really go to a spot and be there live and experience what's going on. And I think to go to the comments of the last presenter, I think it's very necessary in any international exchange that the artists play a big role in actually doing the research local and using the local venues to get the ideas of what is going on there and expressly what the body experiences in that place. So if you're invited as an artist to come to make an exhibition in Marais, we don't say we would like you to make an immersive exhibition with your work. We actually invite artists and give them their house and say, we want you to do everything that you've always wanted to do in your work and give visitors the possibility to be inside it. And then the artist can, make of that whatever they do. And I spent a lot of time, bringing a lot of money together to make it possible. But I think it's very, very important to stress bodily experience and knowledge, local knowledge, and also artist-driven desires to bring to the institutions rather than the other way around.
Thank you very much, Mr. Byvanck. Local versus global, online versus offline platform. We have such an intense discussion on this. It might differ from zone to zone, but when it comes to art, we value scarcity. And we also value the actual experience in person. We have emphasized the experience itself, but as it expands into the global market or online platform, ironically, we have become so free, and it is such a vast space, but within that, we should be able to focus on specificity in order to have a firm ground on our local context. As mentioned by the presenters and discussants, today's theme is the connection, relationships, and exchange in the era of pandemic. To summarize, there must be some relationship within art, and how to relate art. This is another aspect. And what kind of relationships we can recreate within art. As addressed by the presenters, now I'd like to turn to producer Jisun Park for her additional comment or question. As mentioned by Seonghee Kim, I think she made such an important point. As a curator working in the field, if anything goes wrong or if anything goes astray, I always trace back to the origin of that work. Collaboration is of great importance. In international exchange, we need some transnational collaboration and cooperation, and the collaboration and cooperation between and among artists, even if that is outsourced. And even outsourcing can be considered as some strand of some thread of collaboration. Then where the collaboration starts, I think that really matters. And that's the point we have to consider in the first place. Between and among artists who have held a long-term relationship, they can have a good collaboration regardless of the outcome that moves in the right direction. Now I'd like to ask one more question if time allows. International exchange need to be artist-initiated and artist-driven. I believe that's the desirable direction for the international exchange. But so far in Korea, it's state-driven or institution-led that leads to a platform creation, and within such a supporting scheme, international exchange has taken place. By going forward in the post-COVID era, we have to further expand and promote the mobility of artists, but the international collaboration and exchange must be artist-led. In order to do that, what kind of direction the public sector need to pursue? If you have any idea or comment on that, I'd like to hear from you. Is your question to Director Kim? Well, any one of the presenters. Let us first turn to Director Kim, then we will move on to another presenter. We are joined by presenters from Europe. So I'd like to share with you the Korean perspective or identify issues with the Korean system. To focus more on the local context, I think the centralistic regime or the centralistic system is the biggest problem. So whether it's a funding or the funding institution, well, if there is any kind of a funding institution, all the funding goes through that institution before reaching an artist. So it's not really artist-led or artist-driven. So taking any certain artwork to international stage is the role of the mediator. So invitation into Europe or other festivals, everything is decentralized, and the work's roles and responsibilities are distributed, and that kind of funding institution would look for an artist suitable for their project. So the leaders of art organizations and institutions, well, they talk about international exchange and international collaboration, and they sign an MOU, and they identify potential candidates for an artist, for a project, for international cooperation and international exchange. I think that's not really healthy, and I think we do not need that kind of collaboration or international exchange. We have an ample pool of artists. I think what we need is an agent or a medium who will open the channel for artists to move to the international stage. The problem is that all the funding institutions or the schemes, it's all managed and controlled by the central organization. And those who are in the central organization or the funding institutions do not know what to do with the artworks created by artists. We talk about the relationship, connections, and exchange. None of them is properly done. But we have so much funding, we have so many artists, but there is no one who can actually properly connect them or these. That's why we do not have the proper ecosystem. I think that's a problem.
네, 아무래도 김성희 감독님이 이제 한국적인 상황을 좀 특수성을 같이 말씀을 해주셨는데요. 해외 물론 많은 국가들이 예술 정책이나
although many countries have their own art policies and those policies are different from each other.
역할, 그 섹터의 역할이 굉장히 좀
But in Korea, we do not have any strong role played by the private sector or non-governmental organizations. So the art market itself is government-driven and government-led.
물론 이거하고는 좀 우리 한국하고는 현재
And also, maybe the things in Europe could be different, or the Singapore. So in the sense, the Jian, she actually gave us several questions and comments, and the presenters responded to the comments. And if you do have anything to add, or if you do have any comment on the collaborations, artist-led collaboration, maybe you can also talk about that in this. We'd like to hear from Jian Hong.
Well, I think for a long time, right, to have these collaboration when we actually had needed a lot more resources to travel physically and network and build friendship and find reasons for alignment on an institution or, company level. It was a lot harder because you are having to check so many boxes. So I totally agree that it needs to go down to grounds up instead of top down. So for a few years now, when I and my colleague goes to visit different gatherings, whether it is festivals or conferences or markets, one of the first thing I say is actually I don't need anything from you. I just want to get to know you, because most of the time, unless there is a very specific outcome that you go in with your eyes wide open, is really about human-to-human connection. And as a company, as an artist, as a director myself, I can only do and, shepherd that many projects in my lifetime. Hence, the importance of self-driven, artist-driven, artist-connected project is really what will be the engine that keeps this collaboration going. Because even though the art, when it's created, is for a lot of people, I think it is deeply personal for it to be authentic and for it to come from a place that connects. So if we don't ask the artists what they want to make, then what kind of work are we really making? But that is immensely difficult because there are so many hoops to jump through. And I think the effectiveness of, the business is exactly also the downfall of, it getting difficult, inhuman in sometimes, very undemocratic, and where a lot of decisions are concentrated on a few people's hands. So I think that if there's a consistent through line, I feel that in today's discussion, it's got to do a lot with the counterpoint, right? Like if we go too far in technology, then where is the human and our body? If we go so far in globalization, where is the local and the personal? If we go so far in the, the unionization, the industrialization, and the business structure of what we do, then where is the personal and where is the emotional? So I think that, more credit to a lot of, work that we have done to create structure. But I think that, deconstructing these structures is also, immensely important at this point. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your great comment. I'd like to turn to Esme or Valentine. If you have any comment, please, would you please show us your hand if you have any comment? Yes, please.
Okay, so I'm coming from a slightly different perspective, I suppose, in that we do work with artists, but I run a museum which is natural history and world cultures collections. But I'm just reflecting on international, we work a lot internationally, but I suppose what I wanted to reflect on was actually the shift that I think is certainly happening in our work and more widely. And I do think it's a shift. Museums, the way they work internationally as default tends to be very transactional. And whether that's touring exhibitions, even those MOUs that you've mentioned. And I think the shift towards being more relational, a focus on enduring partnerships, absolutely about human to human connections, and actually the importance of both shared values, but also connectedness and a shared vision. And I'll give an example. So at the end of 2019, we became the first museum in Europe to return sacred and ceremonial items to Aboriginal communities in Australia that had come to my museum as a result of colonial violence. And this now, we've already worked for a year with several partners and Indigenous communities across Australia and the Torres Strait. That over time, from visits to Australia, then visiting here, more Skype calls than you could ever imagine, really us getting to understand what happens to those collections when they go home, those belongings, how they will be revitalized, extending our notion of care for those collections, has led us to the kind of work and created the conditions for the kind of work, I think, which we will do over at least the next decade, from now having a new curator of Indigenous perspectives, who herself is of Indigenous heritage, to think about how we bring those new perspectives to the heart of our work, to new commissions, working with artists across Australia and in Manchester. And I suppose from my perspective, what really strikes me is that those people, whether they are local diaspora communities or global on the other side of the world, the people who are most intimately connected with our collections are the ones who are most distant from them. And so I think that enduring relationship, which started as an institutional act, will actually, I hope, create an ecology and the conditions for connectedness across those two contexts, artists included.
Thank you very much, Director Ward. So we actually envy you that you were able to return the collection to the Aboriginal community, and it really expanded the ecosystem for solidarity and relationship. I think that was really a very good example in how we could create a new relationship and evolve the relationship. In that sense, the Director Byvanck, do you have anything to comment on that?
Well, first of all, I totally agree with everything that's been said so far. And maybe only to make a point that Esme already made just before, but to stress it a little bit. It's not an either or issue. It's, I think if you want to work on global exchange, there's always institutional power and authority necessary, because that's how the infrastructure work. And most of the artists I work with wouldn't be willing to work on any detail of the facilitating international exchange. So maybe we could best say the facilitating and the initiating, as to the point of the transactional, needs to come from institutions, and the initiating and making and giving artistic content on things should be artist driven. And I think I think maybe we all strive for that, but we're not always equally strong in also persisting in making that happen. And Esme has a beautiful example where it did work, but I've also seen biennales and group shows where there's like a can of artists that's opened and put into an exhibition space. And that's maybe not the example we're all waiting for.
네, 의견 감사합니다.
Thank you very much for your
사실 우리
comment.
오늘 주제가 팬데믹 시대의 관계,
Today's
연결,
theme
교류인데요.
is
이것이
relationships,
반드시
connection, and
어떤
exchange in the time of the
인터내셔널한
pandemic.
교류 또는
I do not think
온라인이나
this
디지털
necessarily
환경에서의
means
교류만이
international
아니라
exchange or
각각의
digital
어떤
exchange.
환경 안에서 로컬 시장에서의
I think within the
예술가
local
또는
context,
기관과 예술가
but
또는
this might
매개자와
mean
예술가, 관객과
the relationship
예술가
and the
또는
connection
관객과 매개자
between
여러 가지
artist and
관계들이
audience, between
다시 한번
artist and artist,
생각해보고 또
and between
새로운
artists and
기준들을
institutions,
만들어보는
and
그런
between and
계기가
among
되었으면
institutions and
좋겠다는 생각이
organizations.
듭니다.
I think that's the way for us to go.
코지안홍 감독님께서 다른 연사분들께
Well,
질문해 주실
Ko
부분이
Jian-hong, I'd
있으실까요?
like to know whether you have an additional question to other presenters.
No, I'm good. I asked my questions, and I am very honored to have had this dialogue. Yep.
네. 그렇다면 저희가 사실은
If
관객분들한테도
so,
미리 질문을
I'd like to
받았었습니다.
open the floor to the
사실은 오늘 이제
questions.
얘기가 진행이 되면서
We have
이렇게
received
관객분들
some
미리
questions from the
질문해
audience
주시는
already.
시간적 여유가 되면 좀 그런 질문들도
Since
던져보려고
we have
준비를
some time,
해보았었는데요.
I think that we can now ask questions from the audience. I think this is the extension of our dialogue or discussion.
초국가적 연대, 아까
We talk about transnational solidarity as addressed by presentation as well as the discussion. The experience expanding into the global arena, I think this is quite important for audience as well. Artist-artist collaboration or nation-to-nation collaboration is important. However, what is even more important is the expansion of the experience on the part of the audience so that we can have another layer of creation done by audience, so the market itself is going really transnational. Of course, before the pandemic, we had such a move and change, but since the outbreak of the pandemic, such a move has accelerated. If that is the case, including the audience, not just the audience or institutions, or artist-to-artist collaboration, including the audience, how can we achieve transnational connection and solidarity, and what is the important part for transnational solidarity and transnational connection? I'd like to ask this question to any one of you, including discussant. Show of hand, please.
I
think since Mr. Byvanck talked about new relationship forming with the audience and new models, so transnational relationship in a digital environment, we might be able to reach audience from another country. So how can we do a desirable relationship forming with the audience? I'd like to hear from you, Mr. Byvanck.
Yes, it's a broad question and a big one. I think that there's a lot of material to have transactional exchange on a digital level, and if anything that the pandemic has shown us in the last year is that it isn't stopped by pandemics. So obviously everything we could do before online, we could do during. And my point was more to say, what happens to people if this is the only avenue they have? And how do we make new transactional relations after the pandemic when the societies are opening up to other forms of transactional experience? And then the question should be, is that transnational experience different than the experience and exchange we had before? And I think that's something we should put a lot of attention to. What are we getting back to? Who are we when we're getting back? What are the things that we've been longing for, and why are they so important to us? And lastly, but maybe most importantly, artists know what they do. They always know what they do. They have their practice, and they have their sensory system in the world, and they make the works they want to make with the experience they have. Institutions are much slower, and institutions want to do what they've always been doing. So our attention for everything that we're discussing today, also transnational exchange, is what is the role of institutions after the pandemic? What have we learned? How have we become different? What is our take on digital exchange? And what is our take on experience? And to be very truthful, I don't have all the answers, but I'm sure of it, that we have to be very, very attentive to every detail of that exchange and think about what does it offer to us what we didn't have during the pandemic, but also didn't have before the pandemic. What is it that we're seeking? And I think there's already a lot said today about experience, about human relationships, about the local and about the personal. All these things existed, all these ambitions existed before the pandemic. But I think the pandemic has pointed to us again the necessity of the reflection on these values, because we feel that the pandemic has shown us even more than before that there are values that are scarce, and we find it hard to bring them into our global perspectives. So we need to find ways to do that.
네, 감사합니다.
Thank you very much. Jisun Park, the director, she also had some comment on that. Over the past year, while we experienced the COVID-19, in fact, I think virtual world got expanded a lot. And in this process, the artists made some new attempts and experimentations. So the artists, they're engaged in international exchange, and they find out some fresh new perspectives, and then they apply these new fresh perspectives that they learn from international exchange to their works and deliver these perspectives to the audiences. That was how the artworks were performed in the past. But with the COVID-19, the online platform got expanded, and in one single online platform, in fact, the audiences all around the world can now see and enjoy the art pieces created by one artist. And also, I developed an application with the artists abroad in order to have the time-wise synchronized experiences. So with the COVID-19 and also technological development, with the expansion of the online world, we were able to have a lot of new attempts. But during the post-COVID world, you see, when the galleries and museums are reopened, then we will be able to have some physical meetings. However, the experiences that we had during the COVID era, all kinds of the transnational experiences, I think that we still can further develop and expand even after the COVID-19. So although we may be able to meet physically in person, the audiences, I think, should be able to share that experiences of cross borders, transnational. And this is something that we should work on.
네, 이 부분에 대해서 저도 좀 더 의견을 듣고 싶은데요. 조금 이
On this, I'd
질문을
like to hear
확장하자면
more from the
사실 이제
presenters and
이렇게
the discussants. Well, to
온라인상으로
expand this
또는 디지털
question further,
환경으로 예술의 경험들이 확장이
the
되어갈 때
artistic
우리가 흔히
experiences are
이야기하는 것이
expanding on a
디지털
digital format or
접근성에 대한
digital setting.
이야기, 그러니까
But
디지털
we also talk
디바이드라는
about
이야기들을
digital
많이
divide
하는데요.
or digital
아무래도
access.
연령에 따라서 또는
Depending on the
개인적인
generation,
경험에
which
따라서
generation
환경에
you
따라서
are,
이런
and depending on
부분들의 제한
your
조건이 생길 수도
circumstances,
있고
you might
거기에
have some limitations and
물리적인
restrictions.
이전의 예술 경험과는 또 다른
So
형태의
this means
그 안에서의
another
불평등
level
또는
of
어떤 어려움 이런
inequality
부분들이 생길 수 있다고 생각을
or
합니다.
challenges,
그래서 이렇게
which is
관객들의
quite unlike
경험이
that
어떻게 하면
at the physical
조금
level.
더 좋은 방향으로
So,
확장이 되고
with
그리고
regard
그것이
to this,
결과적으로
how
예술과
can we
어떻게
expand the artistic
연결을 계속
experiences
이어갈 수
further in a
있을지에 대해서
desirable
의견을 좀
manner?
여쭙고 싶은데요.
I'd like to hear from
김성희 감독님 그리고 와드
Dr. Kim,
와드 관장님 이렇게 아직
Director
대답을
Kim,
안 해주신
and
관장님께서도 이 부분에 대해서 답변을 좀 해주셨으면
Director Esme
좋겠습니다.
Ward.
우선 김성희
First,
감독님께
I'd like to
마이크를
turn
한번
to Director
넘겨보도록
Seonghee
하겠습니다.
Kim. The equitable experience on the part of the audience, nothing comes to mind, but I was thinking about another point. Is it okay for me to share with you my ideas on a different matter? You talked about transnational solidarity. That was also proposed in my presentation. Due to time constraint, I was not able to cover in-depth transnational solidarity or share case studies. So I'd like to take this opportunity to share with you some of the cases I have experienced or I have in mind, in plan. Quite recently, during the revolutionary movement in Hong Kong, within the Nintendo, the game was used as an avenue for a political statement. So within the game, a lot of slogans for the democratic movement in Hong Kong were distributed to a great number of people. Because of the censorship, they were not able to connect or communicate with each other. And against that backdrop, they made the most of that online platform or that game called Nintendo. So this is not exactly an artistic experience, but that was really interesting. So I'd like to share it with you. And there is what is called uncensored library. Because of the religious reason or political reasons, well, in certain countries have a strong level of limited or restrictions on the freedom of speech. But there is an online library or a digital library which collects and gathers all the articles that have been subject to a censorship. This library was created by the Global Journalist Association. If you visit that library, then you can see all the censored articles and reports which are subject to the oppression globally. And those articles will be handed over to the next generation and on and on and on. So prior to COVID-19, I had such a dichotomous approach to the reality and the virtual world. Believing the reality or the in-person experience is superior than the virtual experience. But such a dichotomy started to collapse during the COVID-19. And whether we want it or not, so many people are spending so much time online. And the people live there and stay there, including our audiences. As our audiences are moving online, what arts can do and what art should do. That is why I came to be quite interested in online. And rather than approaching it as one of the tools we can utilize, we should aim for a transnational solidarity and approach the online platform as the venue or platform for transnational solidarity. I do not know how we can do it, but I surely believe that there is such a possibility.
So thank you very much. Within the online platform or online world, she talked about the new possibilities that are emerging. And I think that they are related with the relationship with the audiences, or that could affect our relationship with audiences. So in this sense, we would like to hear from the Director Ward. Do you have anything to comment on that?
Yeah, so I suppose the thing that struck me as the last presenter was speaking was I was thinking about lots of conversations I've had with fellow directors about hybrid futures, blending real life online, and I'm that's already the case, and I'm sure it will be. I suppose for me, it's really flagging some of the institutional limits that we currently have. So I think the opening up our institutions is, as I said, I think the future's collaborative, but I think we're almost disincentivized from doing that by the way we're funded, by the systems and processes in which we work. So I'll give an example. So I'm in a museum that's undergoing large-scale capital transformation, and I inherited a South Asia gallery that's being built, which is a partnership with the British Museum. And in my part of the UK, there are very large South Asian diaspora communities. So I'm thinking particularly India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. So I inherited this gallery, and rather than do a predominantly white British curated chronology of South Asian history, we opened up, we hosted an enormous meal in pre-pandemic days to around 200 people, mix artists, business leaders, community leaders, most of them of South Asian heritage. And we asked them what they really cared about. And out of that process, we've developed a collective, 32 individuals who are co-curating this gallery. It's co-curation on an epic scale. And part of the reason I mention that is we've had to do all of that online in recent months. We've had endless Zooms. We actually recruited a new design team. We do a lot of work with other organizations across India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. We've had all of those global conversations. But I think the real challenge has been that actually we're not configured to work in that way with our audiences. Actually, it's much easier just to put on a show that people come and visit and experience. And when I look in particular at some of the experiences our collective members and their families and South Asian diaspora communities have had, so they've been disproportionately affected by COVID, very sadly, very high number of deaths and illness within those communities. I think that space we're building is taking on a new resonance. And I think, as somebody mentioned earlier about healing, that's the language people are using, a space where people can come together and celebrate their culture and heritage. But for them, that is absolutely connected to their other family in Pakistan, India, and across South Asia. And so actually, the pandemic has accelerated all of those conversations internationally. It has made it easier. However, what that means for us moving forwards, and I think we're in the midst of how do we bring all of it together as a cohesive whole. I'm not quite sure we know at the moment, but I think that hybrid model and how that will work is something every arts organisation and indeed artists and many others are really trying to work through at the moment. But if we can focus on the quality of the conversation and the relationship and see that as foundational for the future, rather than the outcome, I'm very hopeful.
I totally agree with you. Thank you very much for sharing your great idea. Well, this is something we have to rewrite, reimagine, and think through together. This would be my last question, and actually this question is from the audience. The question is to Director Ko Jian-hong. I think your answer would include what we have discussed so far. What is the direction that Singapore pursues in terms of the international exchange? So, Director Ko Jian-hong, would you please make a comment on this?
If I'm understanding correctly, the question is, what is the direction that Singapore is pursuing? Is that right, for international collaboration?
네, 맞습니다.
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. Wow, I'm not sure if I can represent Singapore to speak that way. Because I suppose it depends on whether it is on a national arts policy level or on an institutional level or on an artist level. I don't think I can speak for the national policy because I think, obviously, for a long time, the phrase we often hear is, projects that can fly the national flag. So I think one of the things that has changed a lot, obviously, in the last year with this digital platform, as Director Kim mentioned just now, is it's the overlapping of global and local at the same instance. So it's also the overlapping of public and private, especially for the audience. So I think I don't really have an answer where this is going, but I do know that Singapore being a very multicultural, multiracial space, we are very used to being sort of like a conversion space, whether it's this business in culture or when a global brand decides to expand, we almost always get to be one of the key points. So we are conditioned in some ways to be very adaptable. So that allows us for quite the last I would say the last few decades for artists to be very interested and curious and able to do exchanges and learning. And because we are so small, right? Once our airplane takes off, we are in another country. It haven't straightened to horizontal, we are already in another country. So we tend to go out a lot in order to look back. We tend to leave in order to sustain. So I think in terms of international collaboration and growth, it's something that is crucial and has been quite the global connection has been quite key, quite key ingredients to whether our learning, our art making, our reflection, and obviously our development. I feel that in the last year, especially with the digital platform and the fact that we can't go anywhere, it's serious island fever over here. We had to rethink some of these works that, it's so easy to just get on the airplane and get somewhere. But to rethink what we have at home. We are so used to going out. What do we have at home? What are we about? And what is our values in these exchanges? And so I feel that the digital platform will allow us to reach out and overlap more, but it may not necessarily be outcome. As in, it may not just about I'm doing a digital production together. It could just be this, exactly this, which is that we are allowed to think more, talk more, reflect more, debate more. And I'm extremely curious about what Director Kim mentioned just now about this time synchronization, because that is a very interesting concept. And it's actually something that we also have been trying to explore, how to make us to be more in sync. But what I mean by in sync may not be what you mean. And that is exactly what these conversations and the international collaboration is most exciting. So I can't speak for the country. I can't even speak for my sector, which is the performing arts, but I can speak for our collective that we have been made to rethink. But our audiences, as a result, in the last year, have gone beyond our island because they could. So I think that this complete loop of what we send out and what comes back, that loop has gotten bigger. And I'm looking forward to see where it could go.
네, 감사합니다.
Thank you very much for the comment. Yes, so we talked a lot about the connections, the relationship exchange in this era of pandemic, and we have had such rich and extensive discussions. But I think that what we need to focus on is to have some more expanded relationship, especially with shift to the digital platform. We are actually seeing expansion of the relationship and the connections, and they intersect each other to create new forms of relationship again. So once again, I would like to thank the three presenters and also the discussants. Thank you very much for taking your time and giving us very insightful comments. This kind of communication, the sharing of opinion should not be the one-off event. I hope that we could continue with these discussions so that we can build better relationships, improve our relationship. For the past 2 days, we have had the ARKO Online International Symposium, Reconnection. And through this international symposium, I sincerely hope that this could be an opportunity for us to think about the collaboration and also the connections and what will be the genuine ways that we can seek for the real relationship. The art, as you know, we are facing various challenges. Art can propose a new standard, and also it can be at the center of the relationship making and all kinds of healing processes. And in that sense, art provides a very invaluable values. And I hope that all the discussions we had as we are moving to a new normal post-COVID, art can continue to have a pivotal role in our society. We can continue our discussion next time. So I hope that we could have even richer, more extensive discussions next time. And due to time constraint, we may have to conclude our session here. Once again, I would like to thank you all for participating in the ARKO Online International Symposium titled as Reconnection. I would like to also thank the audiences for joining us online. Thank you very much.